Hey everyone, DisturbedShadow here to bring you a brand new album review. Even though I'm a little bit late on this one, it's been out for a little over 2 weeks now, but today we'll be talking about the new 8th album from Lamb of God entitled VII, Sturm und Drang. Now, the reason to 7, I believe, is because it's the 7th album they released under the name Lamb of God, even though technically they had one more album before that when they were still called Burn the Priest. But anyway, that's just a little naming thing. I think it's a little weird that they just put the Roman numeral 7 there, because, I don't know, there's a little bit of a weirdness there in the fact that they technically have one more album than that, but it's just whatever. And anyway, let's just jump in and talk about the album, starting with a little bit of a background on the album. So, after 2012's Resolution, which was one of my personal favorite albums from the year 2012, they sort of had this whole thing where Randy was arrested in the Czech Republic when they were touring there because he was supposedly at fault for a fan who died at a concert that they performed there. And then he sort of had this whole trial for manslaughter, but he was eventually acquitted. But he did take his experiences there and translated that into the lyrics and the music behind this album. And it comes across through a lot of the lyrics throughout the entire album. He sort of said that the album sort of tried to take a look at human psychology, inspired very heavily from his experiences in prison, but also from just general stuff. But I mean, the time in prison was the main inspiration for a lot of it. Anyway, enough about that. Let's just jump in and talk about some of the tracks on this album. So we'll start off with the intro track, Still Echoes, which was the first track released off this album a few months ago when they started promoting it in anticipation for its release. And I think it's a really solid way to start off the album. It's just got some really groovy guitar riffs and just really stellar vocal performances. It's just a really solid track. It's kind of what you'd expect from a Lamb of God song. It's nothing too crazy or different, but it's still a really solid track. And lyrically, it sort of talks about, or it's inspired by the history of the prison where Randy was imprisoned. So he sort of, while he was there, he sort of tried to learn a bit about the history of it. And apparently there was a guillotine that the Nazis used when they had occupation of the Czech Republic back in World War II, and she sort of incorporated that into lyrics, sort of looking at the history of this prison and inspiring the lyrics. So that's kind of an interesting fact there. And track number 2, Erase This, is just another really solid track. Like I said with the last one, it's kind of what you'd expect from Lamb of God, but it's just a really solid, heavy track. A lot of great stuff going on there. So, like I said, it's a really awesome track. Track number 3, 512, which is the number of the cell that he was in, I believe. And I think this is the best track on the album. It's just got a lot going for it. It's just really heavy, groovy guitars layered in with this sort of melodic guitar bit that kind of reminds me of the melodic guitar part from the intro of Lay to Rest off their widely considered best album, Ashes of the Wake. Sort of similar guitar effect on it, and it's layered really nicely on the guitars. And then lyrically, the song is just really there's just so much power behind it, both in Randy's vocals and then the lyrics sort of dealing with his personal experiences being in prison. So that's kind of interesting there. Track number 4, Embers, which has the very odd but very interesting and perfectly fitting guest vocal performance from Chino Moreno of Deftones, which I'm a fan of both Lamb of God and Deftones, and I never really imagined the two could be combined in such a way that it would just sound so good, but they pulled it off. It's just a combination I never would have imagined, but it's just so good. And Chino's vocal style just blends in so perfectly with the Lamb of God guitar style. It comes together so nicely, and then trading off with Randy doing some screams in the background just has a really interesting feel to it, and it just adds a whole nother layer to the song. Just really powerful. And then the instrumentation is also really solid. There's lots of cool drum stuff happening, and then interesting bass stuff, and then there's lots of like I said with the previous tracks, lots of really groovy guitar riffs that Lamb of God is known for. And for the most part, this track is what you'd expect from a Lamb of God track, with the exception of Chino's vocals, adding a whole nother layer to it. And it's something that they haven't really done before with guest performances, are using a lot of clean vocals. So it's just a really interesting song, and it's just short of the best track, because I just think 512 is just such a solid track. Even though that's more a typical Lamb of God song, it's just got so much more power behind it. Track number 5, Footprints, which Randy said is actually about the carbon footprint, which I think is kind of interesting. I didn't really come across it in the lyrics, but I can kind of see it now after reading that. No, it's just another really solid track. Nothing too different from what you'd expect from a Lamb of God song, but like every song on this album, it's really well put together, a really well written song, even though it's not too different from what you would expect from a Lamb of God song. But the next track number 6, is where it really gets different. And this song is unlike any Lamb of God song I've ever heard. It sort of starts off with a clean guitar bit, and then there's a really melodic, bluesy little bit before it kicks in with clean vocals. Yes, Randy Blythe doing clean vocals. Now, he did it briefly on the last album, Resolution, on the track Insurrection, but it was sort of layered on top of scream vocals. But here, almost the entire song is clean vocals. And it's got a really interesting and unique clean singing style that I haven't really heard before. It's got this sort of low rasp to it, but it's still very melodic. It has a really unique sound to it, and I really have to give them credit for doing something different. Now, a lot of people were kind of put off by this change, but it's just one track on the album, and it's different, and I have to really give props to Lamb of God for trying to do something different. It's just a really solid track overall, and then sort of in the middle it gets really heavy again, and it brings in really these crunchy, groovy guitar riffs, and then, of course, Randy's signature growly vocal sound that is sort of hard to replicate by anyone else, but he does bring that in again, and then they refrain back to the clean vocals at the end to wrap up the song. It's just a really interesting song, and like I said, I have to really give them credit for trying to do something different, and I think they pulled it off really well with this track. Track number 7, Anthropoid, which is apparently about a group of Czech nationals who were trained by the British to assassinate a high-ranking Nazi official during World War II who was the architect behind the Holocaust. And I think that's just an interesting thing that came up here. Apparently he heard about this story when he was in prison and wanted to pay tribute to those men. And it's just a really solid track. There's so many great groovy guitar riffs that they're just those classic Lamb of God guitar riffs that are unmistakable. And then, of course, Chris Adler's going insane on the drums, and it's just a really awesome song. It's all around amazing song. Track number 8, Engage the Fear Machine, which is about the media sort of using scare tactics and stuff like that, and sensationalizing stuff and stuff like that. But I think it's another really typical Lamb of God song. It's got the great crunchy, good groovy guitar riffs, and the crazy drumming, and the powerful screaming vocals. And like I said with many of the tracks on the album, it's what you'd expect from a Lamb of God song, but it's still really solid, and it's just really well put together song. Track number 9, Delusion Pandemic, which is just like the Engage the Fear Machine song. It's just a very typical Lamb of God song, but still really well put together. And it's just got those really great guitarists that really pull you in, that just those great drum lines from Chris Adler that just make you want to headbang all the time. And finally, the closing track, Torches, which has another guest vocal slot, this time from Greg Puciato from the Dillinger Escape Plan. And that's another interesting combination where he does some backing vocals, clean vocals, and then there's this interesting effect put on them and sort of give them a really interesting sound to it. And his clean vocals blend really well with Randy's screams. They blend so well together. It's just a really interesting track. It just has a lot of interesting stuff going on. There's lots of great groovy guitar riffs throughout the whole thing. Some of the best guitar riffs on the whole album, I think. And it's a perfect way to close out this album. And it's just a really solid track overall. And I do want to mention, since this is the version of the album I have the limited edition, which has 2 bonus tracks, which are Wine and Piss and Nightmare Seeker, and then in parentheses, The Little Red House. Both of these are very typical Lamb of God songs, but they're like most of the other tracks on the album. They're really well crafted songs, even though they don't really do much different. They're still really solid tracks, and definitely worth checking out if you want to pick up the limited edition versus the standard edition. Anyway, that wraps up my talk of all the tracks, so now let's jump in quickly and talk about the band members themselves. Start off with Randy Blythe on vocals. This guy is ridiculous. He's got so much talent. And what I really like about him on this album is that he went out of his sort of typical vocal style to do the track Overlord with mostly clean singing, and he pulled it off really well. It's just really interesting stuff happening there. And then while we're talking about vocals, of course, the guest performances from Chino Moreno and Greg Puciato are very excellent, and they mix things up a bit on the vocal side of things to keep things interesting. And then, back to Randy quickly, the lyrics throughout this album, they're really solid, whether he's talking about his experiences in prison or stuff inspired by that. He just really good songwriting all the way through, and I really like how he writes songs, and they're really well put together. Next up, Willie Adler and Mark Morton on guitars. These guys are really good at what they do, and that is putting together these really groovy, catchy, crunchy guitar riffs that just pull you into the song. And they start up right off the get-go with still echoes, and then they keep doing it. Every song has these really awesome riffs, especially tracks like 512 and Anthropoid and Engage the Fear Machine that just have this really almost marching beat feel to them that just pull you right in. And they're really well created riffs, and the two of them play really well off each other. And then there are a few solos scattered out throughout this album. Nothing too crazy, but they always perfectly fit what the song is doing, and just to give it that really extra boost to the sound, and just those really cool melodic guitar solos that Lamb of God tend to do. But they're a little more shorter than some of the stuff they've done on other albums. But like I said, they fit really well with the songs that they are featured on. Chris Adler on the drums. This guy is one of the best metal drummers out there, in my opinion. He just has a really unique sound to him. You always recognize it when he's playing on the drums. And he's just insane, and he's all over the kit doing all these crazy stuff that perfectly fits the sort of technical groovy guitar riffs that Willie and Mark are throwing down, and just doing all these crazy fills to keep things interesting. And just there's lots of talent and lots of intricacies in his drumming that just sort of make him stand out more than other drummers, and it's still present on this album. There's all sorts of ridiculous drumming stuff happening throughout the whole album that just keep things interesting and make you want to really pay attention to what he's doing on the drums. And finally, John Campbell on the bass. Most of the time, the bass is just sort of following along with what the guitars are doing, but it's turned up nice and loud, and there's still some pretty crazy stuff that he's doing because he needs to keep up with what Willie and Mark are throwing down on the guitars, and just really keeping up with them and doing some cool stuff in the background. And like I said, it's turned up nice and loud, which, as I always say, that's something I really like to hear. But there are a few moments, like on Overlord, where the guitars are sort of more pulled back, and you can see the bass is doing some more different stuff that's not necessarily just following along with the guitar. So props to him for doing a good job on the bass. And together, these five guys really pull off a really well album. Although a lot of people might say it's sort of rehashing what they've done before, I think it's still a really solid album all the way through. And there's enough interesting stuff, like having these guest vocal performances or doing the clean vocals on Overlord, that keep things different and really mix things up and make this album worth checking out. So if you're a fan of Lamb of God, I definitely recommend checking this album out, because if you've liked their previous stuff, you'll like this too. And there's enough interesting stuff that makes it worth checking out versus thinking that it's just more of the same. And if you're a new fan to the band, this is definitely worth picking up too. It's a good introduction to the album. While it's not necessarily their best work, I think it's a good one that you can really jump in and sort of check out this band with. Especially if you're maybe a fan of Deftones or the Dillinger Escape Plan, the guest vocal performances might attract you to this album as well. So definitely check it out and give it a good listen. And that wraps up my review. So if you like this review, be sure to give it a like. And if you want to see more of these reviews, be sure to subscribe. And I will see you guys in the next review.